Christmas dinner at my parents' house. Just the thought of it made my stomach clench tighter than a vice. It wasn't the turkey or the endless parade of casseroles. It was my father, Sylvester. For years, this holiday has been less about cheer and more about performance. A stage for Sylvester to remind everyone of his carefully constructed world and my place, or lack thereof, within it. I swear he still hasn't forgiven me for marrying Lane. My husband, Lane, a mechanic, a man who built his business from the ground up with his own 2 hands, was everything my father despised. Lane wasn't a doctor, a lawyer, or, God forbid, a dentist like Lucian, my ex-fiancé. Lucian Rogers, the golden boy, the one Sylvester still brought up in casual conversation, even though Lucian and I broke up years ago. Such a shame about Lucian, he'd sigh, looking pointedly at Lane. It was a subtle knife twist, a constant reminder that I'd chosen wrong, that I'd somehow betrayed the Weaver name by falling for a man who worked with grease under his fingernails. The kitchen was a whirlwind of activity, the air thick with the scent of roasting turkey, and my mother, Victoria, trying desperately to orchestrate peace. "Hannah, darling, could you pass the cranberries?" she asked, her voice a little too bright. She always tried to smooth things over, to bridge the chasm my father dug between us, but it was a losing battle. Her hope was a fragile thing, easily crushed. I saw my younger sister Riley leaning against the counter, whispering to Lane. Riley, bless her heart, always felt caught in the middle. She was patting Lane's arm, a silent apology for the storm she knew was coming. Lane just nodded, stoic as ever, but I could see the tension in his jaw. He knew what was coming, too. Years of this had worn us all down. I was tired of the snide remarks, the backhanded compliments, the way Sylvester's eyes would glaze over whenever Lane spoke about his work. "Just try to be civil, Hannah," Mom pleaded, catching my eye. "It's Christmas." "I'm always civil, Mom," I replied, forcing a smile. "It's Dad who needs the reminder." She sighed, turning back to the gravy. The truth was, my civility was running on fumes. Years of humiliation had built up, a slow, simmering rage. As I reached for the serving platter, my fingers brushed against something tucked away on the counter, hidden behind a stack of festive napkins. It was a thick manila envelope, its contents a secret only I and one other person knew. Not yet. Soon. The dining room, usually a place of boisterous cheer, felt like a pressure cooker. The antique mahogany table, polished to a mirror sheen, reflected the flickering candlelight and the strained smiles of the assembled family. My father, Sylvester, sat at the head, radiating an air of self-importance that could curdle milk. My mother, Victoria, sat opposite him, her usual festive sparkle dimmed by the palpable tension. Lane and I were seated near the middle, across from Riley and her boyfriend, Ricky. Ricky, bless his heart, worked construction and was another of Sylvester's quiet disapprovals, though not nearly as pronounced as his disdain for Lane. My cousin Nicole was there too, already eyeing me with that competitive glint in her eye, and next to her, Vera Rogers, a family friend who specialized in delivering thinly veiled insults wrapped in saccharine smiles. Vera's sister Bonnie was at the other end of the table, already looking for an opening to criticize the roast. The small talk was excruciating. Sylvester, of course, steered the conversation towards his latest business dealings, dropping names of influential people and casually mentioning the challenges of managing his various properties, including the mall. Then his gaze, sharp and predatory, landed on Lane. "So, Lane," he began, his voice dripping with feigned interest, "still tinkering with those engines, are we? A man of your practical skills must find it quite fulfilling. Not everyone is cut out for the more intellectual pursuits, I suppose." Nicole let out a little snicker, quickly covering her mouth with her hand, but her eyes, meeting Vera's, were full of amusement. Vera just smiled, a knowing, condescending smirk. Riley shifted uncomfortably in her seat, shooting a sympathetic glance at Lane. Lane, ever the stoic, simply took a slow sip of water, his jaw tight. I wanted to reach across the table and kick Sylvester under it, but I maintained my composure, a tight smile plastered on my face. Just wait, Dad, I thought. You have no idea what's coming. The meal dragged on, a slow torture of passive aggression. Every compliment Sylvester offered Lane was backhanded, every question a subtle jab. I could feel Lane's quiet fury building, a low hum beneath his calm exterior. My own patience was wearing thin, but I kept picturing that manila envelope, a small, dark comfort. Finally, Sylvester cleared his throat, tapping his fork against his crystal glass. The clinking sound brought the table to silence. He stood, raising his glass, a smug expression on his face. A toast, he announced, his voice booming, to family, and to the diverse paths we all take in life, even those of us who, shall we say, choose a more humble profession. To Lane, the low-life mechanic. The words hung in the air, sharp and brutal, cutting through the festive atmosphere like a knife. A stunned silence fell over the table, so profound you could hear the distant hum of the refrigerator. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The silence after Sylvester's toast was deafening, a vacuum where festive cheer used to be. My mother looked horrified, her face pale. Nicole and Vera, for once, didn't snicker. Even they seemed taken aback by the sheer audacity of his words. Lane, however, remained impassive, his gaze fixed on Sylvester, a quiet storm brewing behind his eyes. This wasn't new, not really. It was just a more public, more vicious iteration of a pattern that had been playing out for years. I remembered Christmas 5 years ago, right after Lane and I started dating. Sylvester had spent the entire evening regaling everyone with stories of Lucian's dental school achievements, making sure to contrast them with Lane's honest blue-collar work. He'd even gone so far as to suggest Lane could offer discount oil changes to the family. Lane had just smiled, a tight, polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. Then there was the time 2 years ago when Sylvester had joked that Lane's garage would be a perfect place to store his vintage car, implying it was nothing more than a glorified parking lot. Each time, Lane had absorbed the blows, a matter of pride, he'd told me later. I won't give him the satisfaction of a reaction, Hannah. My dignity isn't for him to take. He refused to retaliate, believing his quiet success would speak for itself. He was wrong. Sylvester only saw it as weakness, an invitation to push further. Riley, sitting next to me, nudged my arm. "He's really gone too far this time," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I swear he does the same thing to Ricky, just not as bad. It's like he can't stand anyone who isn't exactly like him." Her eyes, usually so timid, held a flicker of anger. It was a rare moment of solidarity between us, a shared understanding of our father's suffocating expectations. That was it. That was the moment. Watching Lane's face, seeing the quiet hurt in his eyes, feeling Riley's hand on my arm, I realized I was done. Done with asking for respect, done with hoping Sylvester would change, done with letting him define our worth. Lane had his pride, but I had mine, and I wasn't going to let my husband be publicly humiliated anymore. My father wanted a war? He was about to get one. Just then, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I discreetly pulled it out. A text from Ezekiel. "Everything's ready, just give the word." A small, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips. The word was coming. Very, very soon. The air at the dinner table was still thick with the residue of Sylvester's insult, but a strange shift had occurred. Lane, who had been simmering with quiet rage, now seemed almost serene. And I was all smiles. A little too bright, perhaps, but genuine in their anticipation. My mother, Victoria, was still trying to recover, muttering apologies under her breath. Nicole and Vera exchanged glances, clearly wondering what was coming next, their usual snickering replaced by an uneasy silence. "Dessert time," I announced, my voice cutting through the tension with an almost alarming cheerfulness. I stood up, retrieved the carefully prepared pumpkin pie and a chocolate cake from the kitchen. As I moved around the table, serving generous slices, I could feel everyone's eyes on me. Lane gave me a quick, almost imperceptible nod. He knew. He didn't know the exact details, not the how, but he knew something was happening. I placed a slice of pie in front of Sylvester, then, with a flourish, slid the manila envelope from Chapter 1, which I'd retrieved from the kitchen counter, discreetly under his plate. It was thick, substantial. He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "What's this, Hannah? A belated Christmas card? Or perhaps a bill for your husband's services?" He sneered, his voice still laced with the venom from his earlier toast. Nicole and Vera stifled giggles. Riley watched me, her eyes wide. "Just a little something for you, Dad," I said, my smile unwavering. A small token of appreciation. Curiosity, that old, powerful beast, gnawed at him. He picked up the envelope, his fingers fumbling with the flap. He pulled out a stack of official-looking documents. His brow furrowed as he scanned the first page, then the second. The color slowly drained from his face, leaving it a sickly, ashen gray. His eyes, usually so sharp and arrogant, widened in disbelief. He dropped the fork he was holding. It clattered loudly against his plate, the sound echoing in the now absolute silence of the room. His gaze darted from the papers in his hand to Lane, then back to the papers. The title deed, clearly visible, bore two names in bold, undeniable print: Lane Phillips and Ezekiel Gonzalez. Below it, the property description, Weaver Mall. Sylvester's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. His face was a mask of horror, realization dawning in his eyes. The very mall where his most prized business leased its space, the symbol of his success and his power, was no longer his landlord's. It was ours. It was Lane's. The son-in-law he had just publicly called a low-life mechanic now owned the ground his empire stood on. The stunned silence that followed Sylvester dropping his fork lasted only a heartbeat before the dam broke. Whispers erupted, a low, buzzing murmur that quickly escalated. "Weaver Mall?" Nicole gasped, leaning forward, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and a desperate need for information. "What does this mean, Hannah? Lane, you bought the mall?" Vera, ever the opportunist, chimed in. "Well, isn't that just lucky for a mechanic? Must have found a pot of gold under a car, eh?" Her voice was laced with a bitter envy she couldn't quite hide. Riley, meanwhile, had a slow grin spreading across her face, her eyes fixed on me in a mixture of awe and mischievous delight. My mother, Victoria, looked utterly bewildered, her gaze flitting between Sylvester's ashen face and the documents on the table. Sylvester, finally finding his voice, slammed his hand on the table. "What is this? A trick? A scheme? You too. You've been plotting against me." His face was mottled red, his eyes blazing with a fury I hadn't seen in years. He pointed a trembling finger at Lane. You think you can humiliate me in my own home?" Lane, however, remained perfectly calm. He met Sylvester's furious gaze head-on, his voice steady and even. "There's no trick, Sylvester. The sale was finalized last month. Ezekiel and I formed a new holding company, and we acquired the mall from the previous owners. It was a private sale, all above board." He paused, then delivered the final blow. "As for your business, Dad, you're now leasing your prime location from us. And as the new landlords, we'll be implementing some changes to the lease agreement effective immediately." My mother, her voice trembling, finally intervened. "Please, Sylvester, Hannah, Lane, can't we just talk about this calmly? It's Christmas, for goodness sake." She looked utterly heartbroken, caught between the two warring factions. But I felt a surge of satisfaction, cold and sharp, cut through the years of hurt. This wasn't just about the mall. It was about reclaiming our dignity. It was about showing Sylvester that his classist views and his constant belittling had consequences. He had pushed us, and we had pushed back. The look on his face, the sheer disbelief and humiliation, was everything I had envisioned. For a moment, it felt like pure, unadulterated victory. Then, a tiny flicker of something else. Guilt? No, not guilt. Maybe a touch of unease. Was this really worth shattering the family peace entirely? Sylvester, his face contorted with rage, pushed himself away from the table, knocking his chair over with a crash. "You'll regret this, both of you. I'll see you ruined. This isn't over." He stormed out of the dining room, his heavy footsteps echoing as he headed for the front door. Lane leaned over to me, his voice low. "The lease renewal date, Hannah," he murmured, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "It's actually next week." The days following Christmas dinner were a whirlwind of fallout. Sylvester's dramatic exit had left the family reeling, and the news of the mall's ownership change spread like wildfire. My phone, usually quiet, buzzed constantly with calls and texts from various relatives, all wanting the full story. Sylvester's business partners, I heard through the grapevine, were in a full-blown panic. His flagship store, Weaver's Fine Furnishings, was the anchor tenant at the mall, and the thought of Lane and Ezekiel as their new landlords clearly sent shivers down their corporate spines. The irony wasn't lost on me. Nicole, my ambitious cousin, was a prime example of the shifting tides. Gone were the snide remarks and the competitive glares. Now, her calls were filled with overly sweet compliments and thinly veiled attempts to ingratiate herself with Lane and me. "Hannah, darling, I always knew you had it in you. Such a shrewd business mind. Just like your father, but kinder, of course." She even suggested a friendly lunch to discuss potential collaborations. I politely declined. Riley, on the other hand, was a breath of fresh air. She called me the very next day, her voice brimming with a mix of shock and pure, unadulterated relief. "Hannah, I can't believe you actually did it. I mean, Dad was so... he just deserved it. I've never seen him speechless like that. It was glorious." She admitted how suffocated she'd felt under his expectations, especially with Ricky, and how seeing him taken down a notch felt like a weight lifted. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years. Sylvester, predictably, tried to contact me. My work phone rang incessantly with his number, but I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to talk, and frankly, I didn't need to. Lane and Ezekiel had everything under control. Ezekiel, Lane's business partner, called me later that week. "Sylvester's lawyers have been in touch, Hannah," he said, his voice calm. "They're trying to find a loophole in the sale, but it's airtight. Lane and I made sure of that. Every I dotted, every T crossed." He chuckled. "They're pretty desperate." A few days later, an email landed in Lane's inbox. I saw it pop up on his phone as he was checking messages. The sender was Sylvester Weaver. The subject line read, "Meeting request, urgent." Lane looked at me, a question in his eyes. "You handle it," I told him, a quiet resolve in my voice. "This one's all yours." The meeting was set for late afternoon at Lane's garage, a place Sylvester had always considered beneath him. I stayed in the small office overlooking the main bay, watching through the window as Sylvester's sleek black sedan pulled up. He emerged, looking uncomfortable in his expensive suit, clearly out of his element amidst the oil stains and the smell of exhaust. Lane and Ezekiel met him at the entrance, both dressed in their usual work clothes, a subtle power play that wasn't lost on me. Sylvester, the man who had always commanded every room he entered, looked smaller. His shoulders were slumped, his usual swagger replaced by a hesitant uncertainty. He tried to start with pleasantries, a forced smile on his face, but Lane cut him off. "Let's get straight to it, Sylvester," Lane said, his voice calm but firm, resonating even through the thick office glass. "You wanted to discuss the lease for Weaver's Fine Furnishings." From my vantage point, I watched the scene unfold. Sylvester, clearly humbled, tried bargaining first. He offered a slight increase in rent, a promise of future collaborations. Lane listened patiently, then shook his head. Sylvester's face fell. Then came the begging. He spoke of his legacy, his years of hard work, the impact on his employees. He even mentioned my mother, Victoria, and how this would affect her. Lane, with Ezekiel standing silently by his side, remained unyielding. He calmly laid out the new terms: a significant increase in rent, stricter maintenance clauses, and a shorter lease term with no automatic renewal option. He explained that these were standard market rates for a prime location, but the message was clear. This was about more than just money. This was about respect. I watched Sylvester's face, a kaleidoscope of emotions: anger, disbelief, resignation. He looked at Lane, truly looked at him, not as a low-life mechanic, but as a formidable businessman, a man who held his fate in his hands. The tables had turned completely. The deal was struck. Sylvester had no choice but to accept Lane's terms or risk losing everything. He signed the new lease agreement, his hand trembling slightly. As they shook hands, a hollow feeling settled in my stomach. Victory, yes, but it wasn't the pure, unadulterated triumph I'd imagined. It was complicated. Later that evening, back at our quiet house, I found a letter tucked under our front door. It was from Sylvester, his familiar, elegant handwriting on the envelope. My name was scrawled across the front. I opened it, my heart thumping. Inside, a single line: "You've made your point. Was it worth it?" Sylvester's letter sat on the counter for days, a stark reminder of the battle won and the cost. Was it worth it? He'd asked. The answer, I realized, wasn't a simple yes or no. Lane's dignity was fully restored. He walked taller, a quiet confidence radiating from him that had been dimmed by years of my father's disdain. He'd handled the meeting with Sylvester with such grace and strength, asserting his worth without ever stooping to my father's level of cruelty. That, for me, was worth everything. My own pride, too, felt whole again. I no longer felt like the daughter who had failed to live up to expectations, the one who had chosen the wrong path. I had stood up for myself for Lane, and we had won. But the family was undeniably fractured. My mother, Victoria, was still trying to pick up the pieces, her peacemaking efforts largely futile. She called often, her voice tinged with sadness, but she never blamed us. She understood, I think, the years of quiet torment that had led to this. Riley, on the other hand, remained a staunch ally. We talked more openly now, a bond forged in shared resentment and the unexpected triumph. She even brought Ricky over for dinner, and for the first time, I saw a genuine ease in her presence, a quiet defiance of Sylvester's invisible judgment. Nicole and Vera, predictably, became the chief gossips. Rumors swirled through the extended family that Lane and I were ruthless, that we had manipulated the system, that we were just like Sylvester, only worse. The wider family chose sides, some offering cautious support, others outright condemnation. Karma, it turned out, wasn't always clean. It didn't magically mend broken relationships or silence critics. It simply delivered justice, often with messy, complicated consequences. Still, I no longer felt like a victim. The constant ache of humiliation had receded, replaced by a quiet strength. The fear of Sylvester's disapproval, which had shadowed my life for so long, had vanished. It was a strange kind of freedom. One evening, a few weeks after the meeting, Lane and I sat on our porch, watching the sunset. He'd just finished a long day at the garage, and I had been working on some new designs. We were quiet for a while, just enjoying the peace. "To us," I said, raising my glass of iced tea, "to respect, earned, not given." Lane clinked his glass against mine, a slow smile spreading across his face. "To that," he agreed. The taste of that victory, of respect won by force, was indeed bitter.